I want to welcome you all to a conversation about the state of global LGBT human rights and how you can participate in advancing human rights for everyone, everywhere. If you're on Twitter, you can follow at Iglehurk, IGLHRC, and you can join the conversation with hashtag HR4EE, Human Rights for Everyone, Everywhere. We're thrilled to be part of this first Creating Change plenary panel dedicated to the issue of global LGBT rights. I want to thank the task force for having the vision to recognize the critical importance of these issues to the activists here today. The task force recognizes that the world is getting smaller and that we need to build an LGBT movement that is global in scope, that we need to care and to educate and to work across borders. And I want to send a special shout out to Ray Carey and to Darlene Nipper, who saw the importance of this panel and who are my personal heroes and who are paragons of this movement. Yesterday, Ray spoke to us about the state of our movement, about the progress we are making at state, local, and federal levels. Well, at the global level, I'm here to tell you that this has been a decidedly ambivalent last few years. Marriage equality is the law of the land in Argentina, in Belgium, in South Africa, in Canada, in Spain, in Sweden, in Iceland, in the Netherlands, in Norway, and in Portugal. But a bill to place a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage has yet again been introduced in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, and stands a good chance of passing. And the dreaded anti-homosexuality bill still hangs over the head of LGBT people in Uganda. Several years ago, the High Court in Delhi, India, declared that criminalizing homosexuality was wrong. And last year, the Minister of, that's right, that's wonderful stuff. And last year, the Minister of Justice in Mozambique declared that the antiquated law that banned carnal knowledge against the order of nature would no longer be applied. But laws against homosexuality remain on the books in more than 80 countries around the world. And even countries where there are no laws against sodomy, LGBT people are arrested, blackmailed, and harassed on the most frivolous of charges, including loitering, immorality, and my personal favorite, vagabondry. In the past year, the United Nations issued a historic report on LGBT rights, and South Africa led the charge for a resolution at the Human Rights Council condemning violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity. LGBT movements around the world are growing, are thriving in countries like Jamaica, Kenya, and the Philippines. But anti-gay U.S. evangelicals like Rick Warren, like Scott Lively, and the shame peddlers at Exodus International are taking their failed show on the road and promoting fear and hatred of LGBT people in countries where their money buys influence and power. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people still face imprisonment, violence in our homes and in schools, discrimination in housing and employment. We face torture, murder by the state and by non-state actors. 1 out of every 4 gay African men faces blackmail during the course of his life. And if we think for a moment that the grave human rights violations happen predominantly in countries in the global south, let's remember that in Sweden, in the Netherlands, and in most of Europe, transgender people are still required to undergo forced sterilization before they can change their identity legally. That must change. As a global LGBT rights movement, we have much work to do. And today we're going to hear from some of the people who are doing that work on the front lines. We're going to hear from human rights defenders who are working to improve the lives of LGBT people around the world. Now, I usually like to do all the introductions for a panel at once, but I'm going to enjoy introducing these people so much that I'm going to come back up and introduce them one at a time. Nisha Ayub is the program manager of the transgender program of the Pink Triangle Foundation in Malaysia. The transgender program builds community by providing safe space, health information, and group discussions and support, and basic skills to improve the quality of life for transgender people in Malaysia. Nisha shapes programming and advocacy strategies to combat gender and sexual identity discrimination. Nisha has courageously worked to counter the recent rise of boot camps in Malaysia, which you may have heard about. Boot camps that are set up to correct effeminate schoolboys, to correct. Nisha's own arrest by religious police and subsequent jailing for wearing what was considered women's clothing, and the recent government ban on Malaysia's annual LGBT festival, and her work on that ban are symbols of the importance of Nisha's work. With that, I'd like to ask Nisha to come up and address Creating Change.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to thank to Creating of Change and also to International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission for inviting me in this glamorous and wonderful event. Thank you so much again. My name is Nisha, and I'm a transgender, which is so obvious, right? So, I'm going to talk a bit about what's going on back in my home, Malaysia. Skip, please. Okay. So, in Malaysia, we have two laws. One is the Sharia law, and one is the civil law. In the civil law, we have minor offense for LGBT people, but it's not really being used. Then we have the Sharia law, which is for men impersonating as women or cross-dressing. This law has been affected badly towards the transgender community in Malaysia. Why I'm saying that? Because I've been abused by this law. I was arrested by religious officers when I was 21 years old in my going of changing towards a trans woman. I was put in a male lockup. I was treated badly, tortured, discriminated, and of course, I was sexually abused in the lockup itself, in the jail. There's no one to help me. I can't say anything because in Malaysia, if you are a transgender person, you have no rights. You are stripped to naked. When I say stripped to naked, I mean it. Okay? I was forced to walk naked in front of all the officers, just for them to make fun of me. So that's the basic law of Sharia law. Next, please. In Malaysia, of course, transgenderism is not recognized. And let me tell you why. Before the 80s, sex change or SRS was allowed in Malaysia, but when the fatwa came out, it banned sex change in Malaysia. Therefore, whether you are Muslim or non-Muslim, you cannot change your identification card based on your IC. As you can see, as an example, even the last two digits shows whether you're male or female. Even your name will still be stated as your male name. And for your sex, on your right-hand side, it's still stated as male, regardless whether you are post-op. Next, please. This is the latest case in Malaysia, Alisha Farhana. She's a trans woman, and she's a Muslim, and she's a friend of mine too. She's a post-op transsexual, and she wanted to further studies. But the thing is, sadly in Malaysia, again, we are not recognized, therefore her application was rejected. Therefore, she tried to apply to change her ID in the civil court. But again, it was rejected twice. What happened to her? She passed away. She passed away due to the greatest discrimination that people can ever face. She was insulted, Not just her, but even her family. And she passed away last year. Next, please. In Malaysia, we are supposed to have a safe space. We're supposed to have the rights to do gatherings together, but not for transgender community. Again, in Bachok, Kelantan, where a pageant were held, all the transgender were arrested, and one of the transgender were a teacher. What happened to her? She lost a job. She didn't have much to do. So my question is, what happened to people like us there in Malaysia? We are forced to do sex work. I was doing sex work for the past 5 years in Malaysia because it's so difficult to get a decent job in Malaysia. I was in sex work, and it wasn't easy, my dear. It wasn't. Next, please. As mentioned earlier regarding the Section Merdeka, it was supposed to be a safe space for LGBTIQ community together to talk about our issues, to discuss on our issues. But again, it was being politicized in Malaysia. Therefore, it was banned in Malaysia just because it is against the Islamic law. And this implies not just to the Muslim, but to the non-Muslim too. Next, please. And this is a case just happened on last year, I think, yeah, last year December, where a gay man was married somewhere in Dublin, and the religious people in Malaysia was so eager to catch this person, who is a Malaysian, wanted to arrest him, that till now he's not back to his own country. We can't get married in our own country, and we can't get married in another country too. Next, please. So, behind all those negative news, we, the transgender community, with some feminist group, are trying to work together to make a campaign for ourselves, because we want to fight for our rights in Malaysia. And sadly, but sadly to say, when I go around to factories, to NGOs, or to anywhere, even to the government, to ask for funds, when I say it's about transgender, they say no, this is against Islam. So what do? I gather all my friends, and we have fundraising campaign. And just to let you know, things are going okay back home there in Kuala Lumpur, because sadly, the organization I'm working with is only based in Kuala Lumpur. But in Malaysia, we have 13 states. And let me tell you, in every state, we have transgender community in every state. So it's difficult. It is difficult for us back where I come from to reach out to them. But again, I'm truly hoping things will change, as I'm in now in creating for change. So, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh my God.
In 2003, Val Kalende helped to launch Freedom in Rome, Uganda, the only lesbian organization in Uganda. Val is also a leader in sexual minorities of Uganda. She has played a key role as a writer, speaker, activist, community organizer, and builder within the LGBT movement. A former writer for a national newspaper and once jailed for campaigning for the inclusion of LGBT people in Uganda's HIV program, Val has worked tirelessly against the notorious Kill the Gays bill. Please join me in welcoming Val Kalende.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to stand before you today. Last year at the Creating Change conference, my colleague Frank Mugisha attended one of the workshops, and that was a few days after we lost our colleague and friend, my father, David Keto. Today I stand here with a message from the LGBT community in Uganda to let you know that things are getting better. Helping us create this change that we talk about at this conference is important because it gives us hope as African LGBT people, and it helps us move on in these tough struggles that we have. The Getting Better story in Uganda is not popular. I know that what most of you read in the newspapers are these negative stories of people being arrested, people being chased from schools, and people losing ties with their families. But I was in Uganda a few days ago, where I've been on holiday for 3 weeks, and I saw progress. And today I just want to thank you for standing with us in this struggle. Thank you for condemning. Thank you so much for condemning the notorious anti-homosexuality bill and for condemning US evangelicals who are traveling to Africa and spreading hate. I saw hope in people's faces that I didn't see 2 years ago when I left my country. And I noticed that the activism in Uganda right now is far much better than we had before the international community started speaking out against homophobia in our countries. I saw a new breed of activism. I saw activists reciting Secretary Hillary Clinton's speech on human rights, the word for word. And for me, these stories give me hope that one day we will be free in our own country. I visited a group of LGBT people in a ghetto area called Bwaise in Kampala. And this group of men and women have created a sense of community in that area. Every other weekend, they organize and do community work with straight people. And for me, these are stories that journalists don't write about when they come to Africa. But seeing that we have actually managed to get some support, from some Ugandans who believe that LGBT rights are human rights and human rights are LGBT, and human rights are LGBT rights, it gives me strength to even stand as a human rights defender in a very homophobic country that Uganda is. We have a coalition of over 33 civil society organizations that was formed to campaign against the anti-homosexuality bill. And recently I was invited back home to be one of the speakers at that conference. And I've seen progress. I've seen NGOs who would have otherwise not even come to us or even shown us any support, coming on board and saying, we need to stand up against homophobia in Uganda. And for me, that is what creating change is all about. The LGBTI movement in Uganda was initially about 5 or 4 individuals. The founders, you've heard of Victor Mukasa, David Keto, Kasha Jacqueline, Val Kalende, and a few others. I went back home recently and saw young leaders coming up. There was a group of university students doing law at Makerere University who walked up to me and told me, we read your story in high school. You've inspired us to stand up against homophobia in our country, and we are activists because we read those stories about you. So it gives me hope and courage to know that young leaders are coming up because they believe in what we do. I think that is what progress looks like. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me also say that LGBT people in Africa, LGBT people in Uganda, don't need charity. They don't need your money. What they need is your friendship and your support. They need you to ask them, how can we help you do what you do better? They need you to consult them every time you speak out or act on their behalf. And it gives me so much joy to stand here as a Ugandan LGBT rights activist and speak at the Creating Change conference. Because for me, it emphasizes Dr. Martin Luther King's quote, that we are tied in a single garment of destiny. The American struggle for LGBT rights in this country is not so much different than the struggles we have in our own countries. And it's time to speak out as a movement, as a global movement, against homophobia everywhere it exists. And even with these small steps of progress that I noticed in my country when I went to visit, discrimination still occurs. We still need to stand up to US evangelicals coming to Africa and spreading hate. We still need to condemn the anti-homosexuality bill because it's still in our parliament and is coming up soon for debate. We still need you to invite activists to such spaces to inform you, to educate you, and to tell you what's going on in their countries. I think that as we build a global LGBT movement, it's important to have African voices every time we organize such conferences. And it's such a pleasure to be here today. And I would also love to add that it's important to acknowledge the progress we are making in Uganda. I know that the stories you often hear are negative, but there's progress happening in Uganda, and we need to acknowledge that progress every time we write about these issues, every time we speak about them. I think that's very important. And today, with the support of the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, I would like you to join me as we send out an action alert to the US Embassy in Kampala, thanking them for the support that the State Department has given the LGBT movement in Uganda, but also reminding them to continue giving us opportunities to speak with our members of parliament, with politicians in our country, because these are opportunities that we don't have. And with that increased support, we will make sure that we translate the international support that we have into more meaningful work on the ground. I often feel that our movements are famous internationally than they are in our home countries. And it's time right now. We've set the stage. You've given us the support we need. You've funded us. You've given us the love and friendship. It's now time to support work on the ground by helping activists have the resources they need. I visited that ghetto community in Uganda, and people were telling me to fundraise for lubricants and condoms. Now, these are issues that we don't even talk about in the media. Journalists come to Uganda, and all they say is people are getting arrested, but they never tell the real stories. They never tell you what we need on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, I think now is the time to ask us, how do you want us to help you? I think now is the time to reach out to activists in Uganda and give them that tangible support that they need in their organizations. And I think speaking at such events is very important. Thank you all for helping us create change in Uganda. I bring you greetings from the men and women who are fighting on the front line every single day, trying to make Uganda a better place for LGBT persons. Thank you so much.
Joel Simpson is the founder and co-chairperson of the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination in Guyana. SASOD was founded in 2003 to eradicate discriminations on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. Joel has worked at UNESCO and with the United Nations Development Program in the country office in Guyana. Joel's work in Guyana has included resisting police crackdowns on transgender people and challenging laws that criminalize cross-dressing, including a campaign to repeal a law that criminalizes same-sex sexual behavior. Joel Simpson.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me at Creating Change. It's my first time at this conference, and it's very exciting for me to be here and meet so many amazing activists from all across the US, and to be part of this fabulous panel with other advocates from the Global South. Special thanks to the task force and to Eagle Herc for making this possible. Today I want to talk about the work I do in Guyana mostly. I'm Guyanese, but I very much identify as a Caribbean person, having lived and continuously working all across the region on LGBT rights. Guyana has a very unique geopolitical identity, being the only English-speaking Caribbean country in South America. As a former colony, mostly but not exclusively ruled by the British, with a mix of 6 different ethnic groups, as you can imagine, we had our fair share of post-colonial conflict. And many would say we continue to bear the repercussions of that tumultuous history today. While many Americans might know Guyana as the infamous Jim Jones country, we also suffer the fate of other man-made disasters which stemmed from foreign occupation of our shores. As a direct consequence of British colonialism, my country has laws which criminalize any form of sexual intimacy between men and laws against cross-dressing. Yes, let me break that down. In Guyana, it is illegal and considered gross indecency in the eyes of the law for adult men to express any form of sexual intimacy, whether in public or private. So it could be making out, necking, kissing, stuff that you Americans consider first base. That alone could land you 2 years in jail, and we haven't even gotten to the sex yet. Any attempt to commit buggery, a legal term used to describe anal sex in Commonwealth Caribbean statutes, could give you 10 years behind bars. While actual anal sex could see you locked away for life. For all these offenses, it doesn't matter whether there's consent or not. Now, while these laws have not been used to prosecute consensual acts in decades, as you can imagine, they largely fuel an atmosphere of fear among LGBT people who wish we could simply live our lives honestly and openly in peace. These laws facilitate extortion at the hands of the police, because if you're caught in a compromising position in a local make-out zone, the threat alone of being charged for the abominable offense of homosexuality is enough to compel you to pay their bribes out of shame and embarrassment. These laws also fuel everyday acts of discrimination by ordinary people in education, employment, religious institutions, communities, and families in every sector of our lives. Oftentimes, this hatred escalates to violence, and in the worst cases, murder. While these anti-sodomy laws, as they're called, are common relics of British colonialism, left elsewhere too, Guyana's peculiar inheritance is our laws against cross-dressing. Yeah, my country makes a statutory offense of being a man who wears female attire or a woman who wears male attire. And in the 21st century, these laws are being enforced, but only against a select group of the offending population. In 2006, one male-to-female sex worker was arrested and prosecuted for cross-dressing and loitering. Petronella, as she was popularly known, was fined for these offenses. Then in February 2009, we witnessed an organized police crackdown. 7 male-to-female trans sex workers were arrested within a 48-hour period, detained for over the 3-day legal limit, physically and sexually abused by the police, kept in solitary confinement, denied access to legal representation, health care, and even a simple phone call. Then they were brought before the court and prosecuted. As if it couldn't get any worse, the presiding magistrate then preached to them in court, telling them that they were confused about their sexuality and gender, that it was a curse on their family, and that they needed to go to church and give their lives to Christ. At this point, we said enough is enough. Years of legislative and media advocacy had reached its prime. Working since 2003, when I founded SASOD, the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination, still Guyana's only LGBT organization working on human rights advocacy. We built power, and it was now time to take action. On my own accord, I mobilized local attorneys who I knew would be supportive to provide pro bono representation. I contacted academic colleagues of mine at the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Law in Barbados, who agreed to lead the legal research. I mobilized the local transgender community, I took detailed statements of the crackdowns against them, and with all these local and regional partners on board, a year later in February 2010, we filed a landmark suit against the state challenging the constitutional validity of these insidious laws against cross-dressing. This case is the first of its kind in the Caribbean to challenge laws which discriminate against LGBT people. Our counterparts in Belize, which is the only English-speaking and Caribbean country in Central America, are challenging the anti-sodomy laws there. Next month will mark 2 years since we filed the suit in Guyana. And with the case still in court, 2 years, sorry, since we filed the suit in Guyana. And with the case still in court, we are optimistic that we will have a favorable decision. If not, we're going to the Guyana Court of Appeal next. And if not, all the way to our final appellate level, which is the Caribbean Court of Justice in Trinidad and Tobago. And if not, we will consider options available to us in international and regional human rights mechanisms. And while we face an uphill battle in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean, there are positive signs and milestones to celebrate. Our most recent good news is that the Organization of American States, based up here in Washington, D.C., has approved my organization, SASOD, this past December for accreditation in their official register of civil society organizations. This is the culmination of years of advocacy work in the inter-American human rights system since 2007 with partners like Eagle Herc. The accreditation is significant for us because it means our government gave its expressed approval as the Organization of American States works by consensus of all member states, which includes the US too. So even while we are fighting the state in court to strike down discriminatory laws against our community, which the government is either reluctant or too cowardized to repeal, they recognize us as a legitimate civic voice representing the LGBT Guyanese community to have given approval for our official participation in the Organization of American States. Ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that with continued sustained long-term investments in indigenous organizations like mine, we too can create change in Guyana and the Caribbean region. Thank you.
On Human Rights Day last year, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton delivered a speech that is, in my opinion, the crowning jewel on the accomplishments of the Obama administration's commitment to LGBT rights. During the first term. When Secretary Clinton spoke of LGBT rights as one of the remaining human rights challenges of our times, I got goosebumps. I'm getting them now. Mira Patel is Special Advisor on LGBT and women's issues at the State Department. Mira has been a driving force on LGBT issues in the Obama administration and was one of the first proponents of the remarks that Secretary of State Clinton made on Human Rights Day. With no further ado, I give you Mira Patel.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and particularly for the important work that Eagle Herc has done over the past 2 decades. I'm thrilled to be here with you today and to meet so many of you and talk to you and share a bit more about what the Obama administration has done on international LGBT issues. Today I was struck, sometimes we're accused of seeking special rights, but sometimes we get special advantages. I snapped my heel in half backstage, had no replacement, and luckily my partner was willing to share her combat boots with me. So I thought, only at creating change. I also want to extend my thanks to all the advocates who are sitting on stage here for sharing their stories, and for all of you in the audience. Your courageous work has advanced the rights of the LGBT community in the United States and around the world, and it is critical. It is a critical time to be working on these issues. This week, as Val mentioned, is particularly poignant. David Cato was a tireless fighter and standing up for those who have no voice. I urge you to go on the New York Times website. There's a video tribute which captures his work in his own words. and to learn more about what the work is in Uganda and in other places around the world. His death was an incredible loss, and it was a reminder of the heroic generosity that human rights defenders around the world make for us, the sacrifices they make for us to make the world a better place. I know Secretary Clinton believes that America stands with people like David and Val and Joelle and Nisha, who are trying to build a better, stronger future for their societies. Their ideas, their talents, and their commitment are indispensable to the progress that we all seek. And we are so grateful for their contributions. Thank you. While the United States still has a long way to go in achieving full equality here in our own country, the global picture is dire. Nearly 80 countries criminalize consensual same-sex conduct. Several, as Carrie mentioned, have recently passed new anti-gay legislation or who have made existing laws more severe. Governments use the courts and police to silence advocates and to shut down organizations that support LGBT issues or even that partner with LGBT organizations. Violence against LGBT people, particularly transgender women, is increasing. It happens all around the world, and it happens with the tacit support of authorities and community leaders, and at times with their explicit encouragement. In addition to violating basic human rights, these laws and societal attitudes empower police and other authorities to imprison, abuse, and even execute private citizens. They hinder social cohesion, economic development, and public health. As a gay woman of color, I am proud that the State Department and the United States are taking the lead to confront the circumstances LGBT people face in just going about their daily lives. Never before has there been such an open, unambiguous, and clear policy priority placed on these issues as they have been under the leadership of Secretary Clinton. From her first days in office and building on a lifetime of advocacy, I've witnessed the Secretary make clear that the State Department would champion a comprehensive human rights agenda. This December, as you've heard, the Secretary recognized International Human Rights Day in a historic speech in Geneva, where she declared, and it is echoed here, it is echoed around the world, gay rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights. I was lucky enough to be on the floor of the Assembly Hall, surrounded by over 1,000 diplomats and advocates from all around the world, and I was struck by the standing ovation she received after delivering her powerful remarks. Standing there, I knew the United States is finally on the right side of history. As the Secretary said, no practice or tradition triumphs the human rights that belong to all of us. In this speech, she also announced the Global Equality Fund, a public-private initiative I worked on with a team of State Department officials over many months. This fund provides direct support to grassroots organizations to advance justice efforts, protect human rights defenders, and further positive public dialogue about the LGBT community. I am particularly proud that we committed more than $3 million to this effort. This is, I believe, more than the U.S. government has ever spent comprehensively on international LGBT issues ever. And it also puts our country in the top 5 of nations funding these issues internationally. I think it is a remarkable achievement, but most importantly, it goes to help the people who are on stage with me today. On that same day, President Obama issued the first ever presidential memorandum that directed all agencies engaged abroad to ensure that diplomacy and foreign assistance promote and protect the LGBT community, expanding on many of the initiatives ongoing at the State Department. So my current focus is ensuring that these initiatives are integrated and institutionalized throughout all of our work and to carry forward this very simple mission of human rights and dignity for all. This includes making sure, both in embassies and in DC, that we combat criminalization efforts, that we protect vulnerable refugees and asylum seekers, that we integrate LGBT concerns into all foreign assistance matters, and ensure swift and meaningful responses to human rights abuses, and engage with international organizations in the fight against discrimination and violence. This U.S. leadership is consistent with the Obama administration's policy of principled engagement with the world, and our commitment to uphold universal standards that apply to everyone. Before the UN General Assembly in New York, President Obama stated emphatically but simply, no country should deny people their rights because of who they love. By supporting the inherent dignity of each person and by striving to lead by example, we help foster a just world for all people, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity. Thank you for having me here today, and most importantly, thank you for your work and your commitment for all that you do to defend our rights and our freedoms in our communities, in our country, and around the world.
Okay, now's the part where we get busy. If you have a web-enabled device, a cell phone, a BlackBerry, or anything that can access the web, I'd like you to please take it out, and if you can, hold it up. Oh, a lot of lights, I see, that's great. Fantastic. I'm going to ask you to help. I'm going to ask you to take action today. If you go to this website, iglhrc.org/action, you will see an action request. By simply putting in your first name and last name and your email address, you will be dispatching a letter to the ambassadors of Guyana, Malaysia, and Uganda, thanking them for the President's initiative and asking them to train their staff on what the President's initiative says, and asking them to meet and dialogue and pass on some of this funding that we're talking about to LGBT rights groups in those countries. This is a simple action that you can take right here and right now, today, to move forward the cause of LGBT rights in these 3 countries and to work in partnership with the leaders of the LGBT rights movement in this country, in these countries. So I'd ask you to just take a minute to do that. And after you do it, you can hand your phone to someone who maybe doesn't have a phone, and they can do it too. I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to thank our speakers who were excellent and really gave us a very clear idea of what is going on around in the rest of the world. Again, I want to thank the Obama administration, the Secretary of State Clinton, and Mira, thank you for being here to represent the administration. Thank you all for your time. Have a great rest of the conference.